What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and this is part 2 of ranking all grass type starters from least favorite to most favorite. If you're wondering where part 1 is up now on my channel, so if you want to watch that video first to see the first group of starters, you can do that, then come back to this video to see where I stand on this group of starters. Alright, that being said, let's get back into it. Moving on next at number 5, we have Bulbasaur, or at least the Bulbasaur line. When it comes down to it, there's always one thing I always know. You always remember your first. And naturally, when it comes to my first ever starter Pokemon that I ever got when I first played Pokemon, it has to be Bulbasaur. And naturally, it was the Bulbasaur line, which of course endeared me to the grass type as a whole. And possibly like most others, I basically saw this strange little frog-like creature with a bulb on its back, and I was like, oh, this thing looks cute. And naturally, of course, I decided to use that as my starter. Granted, unlike most others, I wasn't that knowledgeable of Pokemon, and I got up to the St. Anne in Vermilion City, which led me to, especially with Ivysaur, so I never got to experience the behemoth that is Venusaur, which really doesn't make sense, and again, I did not use it until I believe Fire Red or Leaf Green, one of those two. Either way, Bulbasaur was kind of an interesting Pokemon. That being said, honestly, when it comes down to it, the most I like for the Bulbasaur line actually comes courtesy of the anime, as Ash's Bulbasaur was one of the few Pokemon that really made the series for me. Naturally, due to it being a natural-born leader, and basically eventually acting as a mediator of most of Ash's Pokemon, which really fits the mold for it. And even with that, Venusaur looks pretty cool as a Pokemon as well. Granted, its Gigantamax form is a little weird, but honestly, its Mega Evolution really does say a lot. And even in playing through Pokemon Legends ZA, the fact I'm about to take on Rogue Mega Venusaur is really going to test me. That being said, as for Ivysaur, yeah, Ivysaur's kinda interesting. I mean, it does have Smash Brothers going for it, so there's that. But honestly, in all fairness, they're kind of middle of it. The entire line is kind of middle of the pack, mainly due to nostalgia and a lot of other things. Plus, MNJTV's Pokemon Talk, which also added to that, so there's that. Yeah. Moving on next at number 4, we have the Turtwig line. Speaking of Pokemon of Ash's that solved as mediators, honestly, the Turtwig line largely became one of my favorites due to Ash's Turtwig's story in the Diamond and Pearl anime. And naturally, considering that I more or less used the Chimchar line, and I like Piplup and Empoleon a lot more than and the fact I like Piplup and Empoleon a lot due to them being penguins, but more on them soon enough. The Turtwig line is basically an interesting group of Pokemon, as it starts off as a tiny little turtle with a little leaf bud on its head that evolves into a much bigger Ankylosaurus turtle blend with bushes on its back that grow nuts that smaller Pokemon can eat. And then to a huge hulking tortoise with an entire tree on its back. And honestly, this makes the Turtwig line one of my few favorite Pokemon ever. Which really says a lot since it's ahead of the Bulbasaur line. But even with that, and I have used Torterra more often than not, and it being a grass and ground type makes it even more amazing, since it basically adds the amount of bulk and raw power that most other teams even dream of, which really does say a lot. And plus, it's basically one of the few turning points that basically gave grass-type starters the amount of that sort of push that they needed to essentially become as good as they are. That being said, honestly, even with that, and if I had my druthers, I would say it's one of my favorites. But in fairness, let's be real. There are 3 more starter groups that are some of my favorites that honestly no other Pokemon would essentially, that no other would essentially fit when you think about it. So yeah, really says a lot. Moving on next at number 3, we have the Treecko line. Oh boy, Hoenn. Yeah. When it comes down to it, Generation 3 was one of the few that my Pokemon career ended up getting into jeopardy. Mainly because at around Generation 3, that's when people started not liking Pokemon. But also at the same time, it was at this point that I was basically being told to stop liking Pokemon if I wanted to make friends, which really did not seem right to me because I still like Pokemon. And honestly, considering how at this point, this was the point when I discovered I was actually autistic. So basically, I didn't want to give up something I liked in order to make friends. But either with that, let's talk Treecko. Honestly, this one is kind of the most interesting one due to Treecko starting off as just a little gecko. And yes, the anime also kind of makes it even more interesting by having Ash's Treecko look freaking cool, especially with that twig in its mouth like your stereotypical delinquent or badass. And heck, even with that, it upped the badassitude when each time it evolved into Grovyle and Sceptile. And yeah, it definitely worked. As Grovyle basically as it basically evolves to gain access to 3 sharp leaves that it could use to slice through opponents like butter. And then there's Sceptile, which adds to the additional coolness by becoming what is essentially the king of the jungle. Yeah, looks pretty cool. Plus, it's a Dilophosaurus, and anyone who's seen Jurassic Park knows how cool that Dilophosaurus is. That being said, it's Mega becoming a grass dragon type and gaining the ability to fire off its tail like a missile. Sign me up, folks. Just sign me up. That was one of the best I've ever seen. Yeah. Moving on next, at the number 2 spot, we have the Sprigatito line. I'm a cat person. I love cats. And honestly, when Scarlet and Violet introduced the starters, and I was interested to see what the starters were, and when I saw Sprigatito and when I saw Sprigatito being introduced, that the grass starter was basically a adorable little grass cat, I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna use that one. And honestly, in fairness, I have not looked back, as Sprigatito looks pretty cool. Granted, I was not one of those people that basically begged Sprigatito not to stand up or stand on or stay on all fours. But in all fairness, I think Sprigatito's entire evolutionary line really ups the ante. Because not only does it have some similarities to the likes of characters like Puss in Boots and Arsène Lupin, but it also has some adds to the aloofness of its entire feline species, of its entire feline nature. And again, the Pokemon anime really adds this by basically making Lico's Meowscarada, from when it started as a Sprigatito to a Floragato, to its recent point, a standard cat, still keeping its cat-like traits and its aloofness. And I can see why I've used Meowscarada so many times in my playthroughs of Pokemon Scarlet. Although I'm gonna end up playing through Pokemon Violet, so there's that. Yeah. Moving on next, at number 1, we have the Rowlet line. Yeah, you knew this was coming. If Sprigatito was not my favorite, it was gonna be everyone's round boy. And honestly, yeah, the Rowlet line is kind of interesting. Granted, the only thing holding it back is Dartrix being a barn owl, and considering how I'm scared to death of barn owls since they look like demons, yeah, it kind of makes sense. But even with that, Rowlet is just an adorable little goober, and it really makes it funny once you realize the Sun and Moon anime made it a complete and utter scene stealer. Plus, if you remember from my top 10 archers in video game list, Decidueye was on that list. So I'm not gonna go further into it. But the fact that its original form is an archer, while its Hisuian form is a simple Ronin, is pretty awesome. Granted, we don't know where Gen 10's going to go, but if it's going to be as awesome as Decidueye or cool as Meowscarada or clever as Sceptile, I'm all in on this. And those are all of the top grass-type starters ranked from least favorite to most favorite. Like, comment, and subscribe. See you next time.